Welcome, everyone. And thank you to everyone who decided to join me for the next 45 minutes for my topic exploring Sidecore AI publishing or how to make your authors love publishing again. Few words about myself. My name is Simon Hauck. I work as lead Sidecore engineer at Merkle. I come to you from Frankfurt today. Maybe you also hear the accent. Um, I've been working now with Sidecore since 8 years, though recently my main occupation seemed to be my 2-year-old son, who takes up more and more time. And what brings me to the stage today is also I'm a receiver of numerous calls and emails of content that was supposed to go live, but actually isn't, which will bring me now to our agenda today. So first of all, we will have a look at the problem. So why is the content not live? We will start then with some general caching patterns, followed by also looking at how Sitecore AI publishing works. Then we will draft our process, our target process, and check how we connect this to Next.js, followed by common component patterns, content structure for cache validation, and then also close it with typical pitfalls. With that, let's jump right into it. Now, this is also kind of a live check. I hope I'm not the only one, but at least I have heard these issues or complaints multiple times on my project. An author has published something, but the changes are not live. It's unclear what configuration they supposed to use. Process the publishing process takes ages and doesn't stop. And some changes even require republishing um, the whole site tree. Now, maybe hands up, who has had these complaints or issues on their project before? Great, thanks. Good. All right. So next, let's take a look at the cause of this. I know also the developers in this room know what to hear, but the main cause of this is not Sidecore AI itself. It's also not the authors. Um, at least in most of the cases, it's not the authors, but it's architectural actually. The main reason is that Sidecore AI does serve the updated content correctly, but the head app is still serving cache content, which is causing this issue. Cache invalidation is something we developers need to set up and implement, but does not come out of the box with Sidecore AI. Other reasons can also be that the content is not linked to pages actually, and we will also take a look at this later. And this makes it especially hard to invalidate the cache for these global components. Result of this is then we have a frustrated team of authors who blame the developers, who say they implemented a shitty solution, and we have also frustrated team of developers who either blame it on the framework, because Sidecore AI is doing it wrong, or they blame it on the authors. Luckily, though, these issues also can be fixed, and I hope that within this session you will also get some help with your personal projects where you face the same issues. Now, let's start with some general caching patterns. This is just a quick overview. The different layers that we have in Next.js. First one is request memorization, which deduplicates identical fetch calls within a single render tree. You don't really have any influence on this one, so just as information. The next one is more interesting, data cache. Persists across requests, and this is also where our content data lies. The third one is the full route cache, which is basically cached HTML. We can also influence this by revalidating full paths. So if you take your URL, you can also revalidate this one. And the last one is the router cache, which is happening on client side, though. Also here, not really much that we can do about this one. For us in this session, the most important one, the second, the data cache, where we can also use the tag revalidation. which we will dive into a bit deeper. Yeah, and for the caching strategies, I assume most of you have also heard these before, just as a short reiteration what we have here. The most performant one and the most aggressively caching one is static site generation. This basically just takes your content once at build time. So you build your head application, it goes through your content, creates static markup, and then this is served from the cache. This means that after build time, your SitecoreAI is not actually touched again. Your content is never retrieved, which makes it very performant, which is nice. But of course, in the CMS setup, doesn't really make sense because you have this editability, and who needs like static markup that doesn't change ever, and CMS behind. So a softer version of this one is the incremental static regeneration, which also takes static snapshots of your markup, but instead of only revalidating on build time, it revalidates periodically. So you can define a timeout. So after a certain amount of time that you can choose, the page is invalidated, and then the content is cached again. Here the most challenging part is basically to get the timing right, and you have to find the perfect balance between performance, where you would like to, of course, cache as long as possible, and also the author experience, who get quite frustrated if their content isn't updated after 5 minutes or so. So you have to really get the timing here right, to make both sides happy, basically. And the last one that we have here is server-side rendering, which basically means that with every request that you send to your head app, you also make a request towards your to Experience Edge, and you retrieve the content again, which is of course nice because authors can see their content immediately. Turn point of this is that of course you hit your edge endpoint every time, which doesn't scale. So in a large scale project, this is not really feasible, and also has a huge impact. I think you can even run into too many concurrent calls towards your edge API. So not really valid. So the most, or the recommendation for SitecoreAI in this case would be a mix of static site generation and the ISR, which will give us, of course, the best of both worlds. So for the static site generation, we will take a look later into how we can revalidate the content based on updated content. So we get immediate content updates, and then also this paired with the ISR as kind of a safety net. Yeah, here again on the safety net. So we will take a look at the webhooks later on and how we can revalidate cache on demand for content updates. Still, maybe another question: who has had set up webhooks in SitecoreAI and then maybe a month later realized, oh, my webhook hasn't been running for the last month because something crashed and actually stopped working? Hands up. Maybe. No. All right, so I'm really the only one who set up 40 webhooks. Still, take it from me. I mean, something can fail. Someone can make a deployment and the webhook stops working, or even your API, and then your cache will never be revalidated and leaving the content stay forever, basically. So for this reason, it's also recommended to set up still the ISR with some period where you can at least say for sure that after a certain amount of time, the content will be revalidated for sure. Next, we will take a look at SitecoreAI, how publishing works, and also our target process, what we are trying to achieve here. So this is already the process, how it will look finished. We have here 4 steps. The whole process here consists of these publishing steps here. First, of course, we have the publishing itself. So the author finishes editing their page and clicks on publish, and the content is sent to Experience Edge. This is what SitecoreAI does out of the box. Second step, for this one, we set up a webhook. I already understood this is not a problem for the room. Everyone is setting up perfect webhooks. Anyway, we are sending now a webhook call that some kind of content was updated and handle it. And this is now important. Now, from step 2 to step 3, we actually leave our SitecoreAI instance. So Sitecore at this point is done, has done its job perfectly, and everything is fine. Now we take over in the head application, and we receive a call that content was updated. And next we have to revalidate basically all the caches that are influenced by these content updates. As we will also see later, we will utilize revalidate tag. It's a Next.js functionality for this one. And eventually, after this is done, we will get all the pages revalidated. And after the next request, it's updated, and we have again a happy author. About this webhook, I'm not sure. Can you read it? Can you not? I see some nodding people. So this is basically what we will get from SitecoreAI. On the right side, you see one full request. Most important for us, though, is we get an array of updates. And here, for us, most interesting is the identifier, which is just the GUID of the item that was updated. If you also can read this one on the right side, we have to note, though, that some of these have suffixes, for example, media items or layout items also get an additional update, which is suffixed with layout or media. So we also have to keep this in mind that we don't run into any parsing errors. We just have to also work with these ones as well. Another important thing, which is not visible here, but it's possible with these webhooks to also send a header, and it's really important that you send some kind of secret with your header that you can then again validate on your head application, just to make sure that you don't receive or that anyone with this endpoint can revalidate your cache. So you need to make sure that this comes only from your webhook and only with this secret. Yeah, so this is what we get from Sitecore. And as I said, Sitecore now is done. Webhook is sent, and we will enter our Next.js application. So the first thing that we have to do is rebuild, or not a rebuild, but a small enhancement of our head application that we actually tag our content correctly. So one thing is revalidating these tags, and another one is actually tagging our content accordingly. So we really know what content belongs to which page. So let's say a header is updated and it's used on 2 pages, then we have to tag these 2 pages also with the ID of our content header. Now this is very, very simplified, what you see here, but the idea of it is, first of all, we get our, this is a wrapper that we put around our Sitecore client. So usually this is what we call in the page.tsx, this line here, page await client.getPage is what you see in your page tsx. This we put into this helper function to not just get the page from the client, but actually get a paged, a cached version of this one. But the only thing that's really happening in this helper function is that we send a request for the page data, retrieve it. We pass the layout data. This is basically happening here. So based on the layout that we receive, we also get a bunch of data sources in there, which then have the data source IDs as well. These we have to use and go through. In the next line, you can see it's here. If there are any content IDs, meaning data sources attached in this layout, then we go through it and we add a cache. This is the key line here, for all the IDs in the layout data. And after this is done, the page is also returned. So the data is then sent back to our page.tsx and we render it as usually. The difference now is that the next calls to get cache page will just get the cache data instead of running the Sitecore client again. Yeah, and as long as there is no cache invalidation for any of these tags, then the page will just be served from the cache. Next, we take a look actually how to revalidate the cache, which is also fairly straightforward. So we just have to implement a root API or an API loop, which is the API that is called from our webhook. So what we saw before, the webhook data with the updates, this is the endpoint that this is sent to. Also very much simplified, but if you're interested in the details, you can also contact me. It's not really hard though to implement. So first of all, we want to verify the webhook. So as I mentioned, you send some kind of secret in your header. Here you check that this actually matches to what you have in your environment variable or whatever you use for comparison here. Next, again, we have to extract the IDs. So what you saw, this array of updates, we basically go through it and retrieve all the identifiers, and this gives us a list of IDs. And then after we have these IDs, we just run through the list and send a revalidate tag for all these item IDs, which then tells Next.js, look, for these tags, there is a content change and we have to revalidate this tag, which will of course hit all the pages that we have tagged before with this good. Then we send some kind of confirmation. What's now, of course, missing here is any kind of error handling, which is also important, also logging. But for the sake of fitting all of this onto one slide, I just left it out. But sure, I mentioned something can fail. For these scenarios, it's recommended that you store your webhook calls into some kind of persistent queue. If something fails, you can still debug and check, okay, which webhook failed, which one worked. And same goes for logging also. Of course, you need to log if something failed, or if everything went through smoothly. And this is pretty much already what we have to do in our solution to get the cache and validation running. And next we can take a look at what this will mean for our components. So common component patterns, what I usually see or what we have in our project is page components. So you have local data and that is only used on one page. You have shared components. Of course, this can be some kind of campaign teaser that is used across a couple of pages. And then the most interesting one probably also for this is the global components, which could be the navigation, which is basically present on every page, header or footer also here. Yeah, as I mentioned, the first two ones, page content and also shared content, are fairly easy. You already described the solution. So these are actually in your layout data, so it doesn't really matter if it's only on one page or if it's used on multiple pages. If you can extract it from the layout data, you get the IDs. You can run the revalidate cache, and then you will automatically hit all your pages and they will also get revalidated. Now, more interesting, and it is for some components like header or footer, which are present on every page. Yeah, in some cases, this we will also see later, these are not really linked to the page, but retrieved in some other bit strange way. So here we have to check if we can actually retrieve it from the layout data or not, and also if we only use the Sitecore onboard utilities, then this would also require us to republish all the pages, so they get a revalidation, which then means, of course, if I make a small change to the header, then I have to run a republish to the whole content tree, which also takes a lot of time. So we would also like to use the tagging here. So yes, let's take a look how our solution that we saw before can also help in this scenario. Yeah, with the content structure for cache and validation. Yeah, as I described in the slide before, the page scope content is already linked. In the example that I already mentioned, the navigation, this is used on all pages. We have the problem that publishing the navigation will either reside in all pages being published, which is not ideal, or the other way around. It could also be that it's not linked to any page and then nothing gets published and the navigation just stays like it is and is stale and could only be updated by running a deployment or a build again. This is what I mentioned before, classic anti-pattern or an error that we see sometimes is that you don't place these global components in your layout, but put it into some kind of global repository, especially navigations. And then you either have a link to it directly in your code. So you just retrieve the navigation in your head application, or you link it with some kind of query that is only resolved then in the head application, which also doesn't create a real link in SitecoreAI, which can be used to to publish then all the related pages. This, of course, then will result in the webhook being triggered correctly. So navigation is updated, is being published. Then we send the webhook. This also gets the ID, everything is fine, but the ID is not attached as any tag to any pages, which then results also in being navigation just stale and the webhook is basically running into nothingness. So as a solution for this one, what we can do is for the components, it is important that they are also correctly tagged so that they can be invalidated. Again, the navigation has to be somehow attached to your pages right now. There's also the issue that we do not have component level caching yet, which would help here a lot. So still, if the navigation changes, we somehow have to invalidate the cache for the whole page. Right now, global components currently also require to have their IDs added to tag to all pages. So the solution that we saw before, if you have one of these global components that you would basically go through the page and check for one of these global components and then add the ID there additionally. Also not the ideal solution because you would like to only cache your navigation and then only update also your navigation. But as I mentioned, component level caching is not yet really available, and still only revalidating the cache on our head application would still be more efficient and cheaper than doing a full republish of all our pages, which would be the alternative to get them um, invalidated. Maybe one question also in between, another live check. these global components and the retrieval of the navigation. Who has seen similar architectures not having the navigation actually placed as a component on your page, but retrieving it in some weird way in the head application? Yeah, some. So you understand the issue that I'm talking about, that navigation is updated but not invalidated. Good. Thanks. Great. So yeah, just reiterating, um, for the navigation, not ideal, but still I would recommend here, go through the page, or when you retrieve the page and you have this kind of setup and cannot change it. I mean, ideally you would put also the navigation as a component on your layout data, get this link correctly working, and then have just the text with our solution as we have before. If you cannot change it for some reason, then retrieve the ID and add it as a tag also to your page. And then instead of republishing the whole website, you just can publish your navigation. It will trigger a revalidation of the tag, which will also catch all the pages and they will get revalidated. Additionally, you can also, again, as we um, talked about before, use ISR. So to really make sure you can also still use these periodic updates to invalidate the cache. So navigation changes at least after 5 minutes or something like that. Good. Some typical pitfalls, I mean, I already mentioned some, but what we saw in projects, some speed bumps, I would call it. The first one I already mentioned. This is really key and important, that you need to secure your webhook or your API as well. So use this secret header on your webhook. Otherwise, if someone finds out what's the API endpoint, then you have basically an open gate that anyone can just call it and revalidate all your caches. The next one, also something, I mean, this is pretty easy to fix, still something that we um, bumped over in a couple of projects. Somehow you start with testing and you use the preview because it's easier. You save it and you see it immediately. But then, I mean, it takes a month, then production is there and someone just makes a copy paste and then somehow preview endpoint just ends up in production. And everyone is wondering why the static site generation doesn't work or caching doesn't work at all. The reason most of the time here was that you are just retrieving the preview data instead of the published data. Um, Also, again, I cannot believe no one has a failing webhook on their project, but this is something that is something that we saw multiple times. These webhooks, I mean, they log it, but you have to actually retrieve the data, or you have to list your webhooks to get the status of them, and then you can also see last run, and you can get a log message, or it all actually says this stopped working. But if you don't monitor this regularly, then yes, I've also seen webhooks not working for several months without anyone noticing. And just for these cases, yeah, it's important to monitor. It's important also to log if something fails. And um, in case you want to retry, or you want to monitor if something wasn't revalidated in the past, then you also should keep these webhooks in some kind of persistent storage, just so you can debug and revisit these as well. Um, yeah, and the last one I explained also in more detail: global content with no item ID tag or no actual link to any pages. This is again the navigation. And as I mentioned, there's not the ideal solution, but I still think it's more performant and easier to use if you have these kind of components. You just go through all your pages and add these global components as a static tag, basically, until we get at some later point in the future component-based caching. Then again, of course, we can implement also a nicely cached navigation that just can be updated on its own. Um, Already my last slide. I'm a bit fast. Um, Key takeaways. The first one, of course, is understand the pipeline. So this is where we saw also the most misunderstandings. Until which point does Sitecore handle publishing, and where do we have to take over publishing and caching on our side? I showed this. So the webhook is also our responsibility, but it's built into Sitecore. So this is half in Sitecore publishing, of course, to Experience Edge. Edge is out of the box. So this is something we get from Sitecore. Webhooks is something we have to configure and monitor. But everything that comes afterwards, caching, revalidation, is responsibility of the head application, and so basically of us partners and developers. Um, Also, yeah, which cache strategy to use? Use a combination of ISR and SSG, um, which gives you the best of both worlds. So you can revalidate all the content as you need it. So the content authors get their updates immediately with the cache invalidation via text, and also ISR just as the safety net. Something goes missing or doesn't work correctly, then still your content doesn't stay stale forever. Yeah, tag every SitecoreAI fetch. This is also important to tag these content retrievals accordingly, so you can also revalidate them targeted. And yeah, the last one, design content structure for cacheability. So if you work on a new project, you don't inherit something, make sure that always you have this link between your pages and your content. So don't just have the navigation dangling somewhere in the global repository, but actually attach it to your layout, and then give Sitecore the chance to create this link and make it also easier to tag it and then revalidate it again. Also very important if you use the related publishing, because this also depends on these kind of links. Yeah, and I said I'm a bit fast. First, thank you to the sponsors, of course. And are there any questions?
Uh, Thanks, Simon, for the great presentation. Um, the question is the following. Consider navigation as a complex component where it may include a number of renderings or some other parts of the functionalities where something should be or must be cached and other parts must not. Do you see any issues with that approach?
Do you have a specific? I mean, the first thing that would come to my mind would be that for these, let's say, a customer portal where you really need like user data, you mean?
Hmm.
That has to be updated. For these cases, I mean, you wouldn't really use the server components, but actually client components, which then um, would retrieve the data on client side. And then you can really make sure that the data is really up to date and not cached.
So every time you do that verification, right?
Sorry, I'm not sure if I get the question. So, what we saw here, the caching is happening for server-side components. Um, but you can also have like client-side components, which will then run the query um, on the client side. So not from cache, but the user gets a static page. Let's say stage is static. Then you have one component, which is defined as client component. This can have your user data, which cannot be cached. Same, for example, for form data, let's say. And then afterwards, you again have some server side components, which get cached then again. But yeah, you can imagine it like a window in your static frame. So you have a static frame, And in there, you have a client-side component which will retrieve the data after the user has requested it or being served from the browser. I don't know if this answers the question or if I misunderstood.
Yeah, yeah, it is. It is. Thanks a lot. Yeah, and you probably closed a couple of user stories from our backlog. Thanks.
Any, yeah.
When I do a publish in the webhook, I see only one item. If I do a full publish or a publish with children, and it's only one item in the webhook. If you, how do you handle that?
So the one child item of the page, you mean?
Yeah, when if I publish from pages, then it is just a single item. But from the content editor, you can do an publish with sub items. You can publish a tree.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, if in this case, your content, the text basically, you have your page, which has a list of tags. One tag is the item ID of the page itself, and the rest of the text is basically all the IDs from the data sources. So even if it's just one component that is used on this page, you send the revalidate tag for this one component, then the whole page will be revalidated. So it's not necessary to publish also the page. Just publishing this one component will be understood in your head application like, the one component changed on this page. I have to revalidate the whole page. What was this the question of the child item?
Yeah, a little bit. But I mean more when you do from the content editor, when you publish multiple items.
This will then trigger the same webhooks basically. If um, maybe let me go back here. So if you do this from the content editor and you publish multiple items, then this will be just represented in this update. So this can be an array of updates. This basically tells Experience Edge, this is a list of items that changed. And if you would publish multiple items from the content editor, then all of them would be listed in this updated list. And then, yeah, based on is this component used on a specific page or not, then this page would be revalidated.
All right. Yeah, yeah. I experience on other webhooks, but maybe that's it's updated. But I will try. Thank you.
I saw the back.
Hi.
Hi.
I came in a little late, but I was just curious. Did you show anything about Next.16 cache components at all?
No, I only mentioned it. I haven't shown yet. I mentioned that the solution that we have for the navigation right now is a bit unoptimal because the what I showed here would mean you update the navigation. This will trigger revalidating all the pages.
Every page.
But-
And that's the exact problem that like you DDoS your whole site every single time you do that.
Exactly. I only mentioned it. I didn't go into detail. But yes, with a later version of Next, I cannot give any roadmap because
Yep.
I don't know it. But yes, I assume that sooner or later we will also get
It should be like the
cache
standard
components.
pattern, I would imagine, is decouple your nav
Yes.
from all of the items so that you can selectively
Yes, correct.
invalidate just the nav.
Yeah,
Not
correct.
kill your cache every single time. Okay. All right. Thanks.
Good. Anyone else? Then I thank you all for your time and yeah, have a nice day and enjoy the rest of the event.